So we're going to have a look at three different kinds of sampling: systematic sampling, simple random sampling, and stratified sampling. We're going to do this in connection with the large data set on national health, so make sure you have this downloaded, large data set 3. It looks a little bit like this. So what data are we going to collect? We're going to create, first of all, a systematic sample of size 20, and from there we're going to note the weights of people in this sample. So let's remind ourselves of what a systematic sample looks like and how we would conduct one. We need to decide on the size of our sample. We're going to create a systematic sample of size 20. We then need to decide whether we need, e.g., every 5th, 10th, 20th item of data. Now, there are 200 items of data in our sampling frame, i.e. 200 people who have been surveyed or whose data has been collected. So that means if we want a sample of size 20, from our starting point we're going to need every 10th value. But we don't just start on item number 1, we use a random number generator to generate a starting point. And from there we count every 10th value. We can create the random number on our calculator using our graphical calculator, or we can do it in the spreadsheet package, which is what we're going to do. So the spreadsheet package that I'm using is Excel, which is a very common way of using spreadsheets. I'm using Excel for the Mac. You might be using Excel on Windows, you might be using Google Spreadsheets. They all work roughly in the same way. There will be minor differences in how things look, but you should hopefully be able to work it out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce an extra column here, which I'm going to head as number. So I can number all of the items in the sampling frame. I'll just input 1 and 2 in these cells, I'll highlight them, and then if I just put my cursor on the bottom right hand corner of that highlighted block, you'll see a little black cross pop up, and if I double click that, it will generate a numbering system, which will be really useful. Then going to insert another column just before that, and this is just going to be for some rough working. So to generate my random number, if I input the formula equals rand between, and I want a random number in between 1 and 200, you might find it a little bit easier to look at the formulae up here. Press enter and it generates the 68th value. Now I'm going to retype that because you'll see in a minute Excel recalculates random number formulae every time you input something new into the spreadsheet. So that 68 in cell A2 just here is going to change to another random number, but I don't want that. I want to start with 68. There we go. It's changed to 155. So I'm going to delete that 155 and I want to use 68. So I need to take every 10th value starting with 68. If I input a formula here to tell me which numbers I need to collect, that's equals, and then I go back to A2, I can either type it in or I can use the arrow keys to take me there, plus 10 equals 78. And then if I click on cell A3 and then drag it down with this button here, I can generate these numbers. Now the spreadsheet only goes up to a count of 200 people. There are only 200 people in the population we're dealing with, so I don't need any of these here. I'm going to highlight them, right click and clear those contents out. But this doesn't give me a sample of size 20. So after I've collected the 198th value, I'm going to have to circle back, and of course I'm going to want the values that are 10 before this one. So I'm going to want the 58th value, the 48th value, 38th value, the 28th value, the 18th value, and the 8th value. So what I'm going to start doing is clicking on the cells in the number column that match. So there's the 8th value, and there's the 18th value, and I'm going to highlight them. I'm going to stop at this point, and in the next part of the video you'll see that I've done all the highlighting without recording it because it's a little bit boring to watch. So as you can see, I've now highlighted all of the numbers of data items that I want to use. I'm going to click on this cell here in the top left-hand corner where the black arrow is there, select everything and put in some filters here. This is then going to allow me to click on this drop-down filter in the B column, the number column, and I'm going to choose to filter just the values that are highlighted in yellow. Close this. This then gives me the people that are included in my sample and all of the data about those people. Now, if you recall, we wanted to collect the information on the weights of the people in this sample, so I'm going to highlight this column. Interestingly, you can see there's a missing item of data there. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to go into a new tab here at the bottom. Just in case you missed that, I clicked here at the bottom, generated a new sheet, and I'm going to paste that data in there. So it's ready. I'm going to rename this as well. So to do that, I just double click on the tab like that, and I'm going to rename it Systematic Sample, so I know which one it actually is. So we're now going to create a second sample, a simple random sample this time, still of size 20, and this time we're going to note the BMI of people in this sample. So let's remind ourselves of how a simple random sample works. We need to make sure every item in our sampling frame is numbered from 1 onwards. We've done that. We need to decide on the size of our sample. We know that it's going to be a sample of size 20. And we use a random number generator to generate a set of 20 random numbers. We then identify the corresponding data items from the sampling frame. So let's go over to our spreadsheet, which I'm going to tidy up a little bit. I'll select everything here. I'm going to remove the filters, so they're gone for the moment. I'll click the whole of column B, select the whole of column B by clicking on the letter B. And I'm going to get rid of the colours by the no fill option. I'm also going to select these counts here and clear them so they are gone. I'm going to insert another column here as well, and you'll see why in a minute. Let's generate the random numbers, and again you could do this, it might be easier to do this on your graphical calculator and then select the numbers that you want. So equals rand between, and we want 1 to 200. And we've got that one. It's going to change in a minute when I generate the whole sample, but that's okay. So I'll go to 21 here, so we know we've got 21 items. Now it's always possible that the same number could come up more than once, in which case you need to re-sample. You can't obviously pick something twice. Now, what's going to happen in a minute, if I start clicking on cells to colour them in, these numbers will change. So what I want to do is make a record of these numbers. I could just write them down, but I can use a nice trick in Excel. I highlight the block of numbers, I press Ctrl-C or Command-C, and then I right-click, and instead of just pasting, don't do that, I go to Paste Special, and then I paste just the values, which means that the formulae are ignored. So I should get an exact list of the same values we had originally. Of course, these numbers have now changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete column A. I can click on all of it by pressing A there, clicking on A, right click and delete it so it's gone. So these were my random numbers. So I now need to select all of these from the sampling frame. Again, that's quite boring, so I'm going to do that and then we'll pick it up after we've got those numbers selected. So the eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted that the number 22 appeared in my sample twice, which of course means I needed to resample, so I generated another number randomly, which was the value 30. I've now highlighted in yellow all the items that are going to make up my sample. I'll click again here, put in the filters, and I'm going to filter by colour and just choose the items that have come up in yellow. Now this time I wanted to select information on the BMI of people in this sample, so I'm going to go to that column, I'm going to highlight those values, copy, and I'm going to create a new sheet here by clicking on this plus button down here. You can all hopefully see that at the bottom there. I'm just going to point that out again, and I'm going to paste in that information so we have it ready to go, and I'm going to rename this sheet Simple Random Sample so we have that ready to go. So we're now going to have a look at how we might conduct a stratified sample, in fact a proportional stratified sample. Our aim is to create a sample of size 20, and we're going to stratify across 3 age groups: under 30, 30 to 60 inclusive, and over 60s. So this is how it works. We need to decide on the key subgroups of the population. Those are the 3 age categories I just mentioned. We work out the proportion that each subgroup represents of the whole population. We then decide on the size of our sample, which is 20, and we work out how many from each subgroup should be included in the sample so that the sample represents the population proportionately. So, for instance, within the example that I have here, if half of the population consists of cats, then half of the sample should be taken from the cat population. Once we've identified how many items we need from each subgroup, or how many people we need from each subgroup in our case, we then use simple random sampling within the subgroup to identify which items or which people are included in the sample. Be aware that you may have to round appropriately when calculating the number of items in the sample. So let's revisit our spreadsheet. As you can see, I have tidied it up a little bit again, so we're back to the start. I'm going to actually set up the 3rd tab on here, and I'm going to call this Stratified Sample. And I'm just going to set up a few things. Let's set up the categories. So we had under 30s, we had 30 to 60 inclusive, and then we had the over 60s category. And what we want to do is count up how many people are in the population from each of these subgroups. So we're going to use some counting formulae. So let's start with equals count if. Okay, we don't need the S for this one. Count if, open bracket, and then we need to make sure that we link back to the 2nd page here. So I'm not going to input anything just here. I'm going to go back to where it says data, and then I'm going to highlight the age column, which is column D. I then need a comma, and then I need the criteria on which we are counting. The criteria on which we're counting has to go in quotation marks like this, and the criteria is less than 30, not less than or equal to 30. Close the quotation marks, close the bracket, press enter, and you'll see we spring back onto this tab, the Stratified Sample tab here, and there are 58 people who are under 30. We can then fill in how many people are aged between 30 and 60 inclusive. So we want equal count ifs. So there has to be an S this time because we're going to include 2 different criteria. So we want open bracket, go back to the data tab, click on column D to highlight all of it, comma, quotation marks. The first category is that we want people who are greater than or equal to 30 in age, so above 30, so 30 or above. We then want a comma. Actually, before we want the comma, we want to close our quotation marks, then we want the comma. Highlight D again because we're counting from there, comma, and this time in the quotation marks we want less than or equal to 60, so we want anybody who is 30 to 60 inclusive. Don't forget to close the quotation marks, then close the bracket, press enter, and we have 88 people in that age category. The last one is simple again, equals count if, open bracket. We want to go back to the data tab, D again, comma, open quotation marks. This time we want over 60, so greater than 60, not equal to, like that. And you can see the formula up here. Press enter and we have this result here. I'm just going to do a quick check, and that's a little totalizing formula. So equals sum, open bracket, and then I'm just going to highlight these 3 cells here. It should tell me what the total of those is, and it should be 200, which shows that the count has been done correctly. So I'm now going to work out what proportion each of these is out of 200. So that's equals 58 divided by 200. So B1 divided by 200 equals 88 divided by 200 equals 54 divided by 200. So that's the proportion that each subgroup makes up of the population. And again, if you want to add these together, they should come to a total of 1. We then want to work out how many are in the sample. So we multiply this proportion by the sample size. To do a multiplication, we want the asterisk here, and we multiply by the sample size, which is 20. And then we can just drag that formula down there. Okay, and then if we add these 3 values up, they should come up to 20. But of course, we can't have 5.8, 8.8 and 5.4 people, so we have to round up each of these numbers. So let's try 6, 9 and 5 if we round to the nearest whole number, and if we just check the total here, that comes to 20. It's not perfect, but it's as good as we can go. I'm just going to insert an extra row here so you know what these different columns are. So that's the frequency in each age category, that's the proportion, that's the number in sample, and then this last one is the actual number in sample after we do our bit of rounding. So we need to select 6 people from the under 30s, 9 people from the 30 to 60 inclusive, and 5 people from the over 60s. So, having identified how many we need in each subgroup for our sample, we're going to actually take this sample. So if I go back to the main data sheet, just to tidy things up for the moment, I'm going to delete columns A and B, although we may insert something similar a little bit later on. I'm then going to click the top left-hand corner here to select everything, and then I'm going to sort all the data in order of age from the lowest age to the highest age. So click the downward arrow here, which is the sort, and I'm going to go with a custom sort. I'm going to sort it by age, from smallest to largest, and here we go. So let's insert a column again, and this is going to identify the age group. So we have here, for instance, under 30, and all of these are under 30. I think actually the best way to do that, if I select all the ones under 30 and then just paste that, that will work a little bit better. Then we have the next group, which are 30 to 60. I think we'll have to type it in as a word. And then if we identify all of these, and we're looking at 30 to 60 inclusive. So that's everyone up to here. And then everybody else falls into, everybody else falls into the over 60 category. And I'm just going to paste that, copy and paste that in. So we've just identified the different categories. Now, I'm going to insert another column, and I'm going to count, like we've done previously, the number of people we have. I'm going to number the number of people that we have, but I'm going to do it within each age category. So we're going to count up from the first to the second to the third, etc. for the under 30s. So I'm going to drag this down up to here. So we see the 58 people who are under 30. And then we're going to start again for the people who are 30 to 60. Because when we do our random sample, this is one way, it's not the only way, it's one way of choosing our numbers. And then finally, we'll do the same for the over 60 category. Again, there are different ways in which you can choose your numbering. I've just chosen to do it this way. Okay, so we now need to do our random sample. So I'm going to go back to this tab here, the stratified sample, where there's a little bit more space, and let's start looking at the random sample. So for the under 30s, we're going to type in the formula equals rand between, and we want a random number between 1 and 58. Okay, now we need to make sure that there are 6 people in this sample. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I know this is going to change every time I press the space bar, but that's absolutely fine. We'll sort that out in a minute. Then for the 30 to 60 inclusive category, we want a random number, this time between 1 and 88. Remember, we restarted the numbering. And we want to make sure we've got 9 of those. Okay, again, all the numbers are going to change, it doesn't matter. And then lastly, for the over 60s, we need to generate some random numbers, and we need to generate 5 of these random numbers. So rand equals rand between 1 and 54, and we only need 5 of these. So we've got sets of random numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of that, and I'm going to paste it underneath, and I'm going to use that concept of a right click and a paste special, where we just paste the values. These values up here have all changed, but what I'm going to do is delete them all. Let's try that again. Right, so we have our random numbers over here, and we're going to use these. Always double check that you haven't got any repeats and you don't need to resample. I don't think we've got any repeats. I'm just going to order these. So, in fact, let's order them descending. Let's order them, sorry, ascending. And the same over here. Let's sort these in ascending order, and then it's a bit easier to spot whether you've got any repeats. And then all we have to do is go back to our data sheet and make sure we choose those random numbers. So for instance, we want numbers 1, 11, 37, 41 and 53 from the under 30s category. As you can see, I have highlighted the cells that we need for each part of the sample. We're now going to collect the data. So I've put in a filter. Again, remember you can click on this cell up here in the top left hand corner there and then add or remove the filters as you need. So we're going to start off by filtering through and collecting those in the under 30 category. The information that we are collecting is resting pulse rate, which is over here. So there we have that piece of information. So I'm going to go into my stratified sample and I'll just put that in there. Going back to the data sheet, this time we're going to filter by the 30 to 60 age category. So again, for the pulse rate, I want these values here. And for the over 60s, let's collect the orange data values, which are here, and then we'll paste them in there. So we have our three sets of data. I'm going to combine them over here as one single data set. And we have our stratified sample. You now have three different samples. A sample which was selected systematically of weight measurements. You have a sample which was selected through simple random sampling of BMI measurements. And you have a sample which was selected using proportional stratified sampling of the resting pulse rates. We will be using these three samples in a future lesson. You can also use your graphical calculator to generate random numbers. These are the key presses that you need. Option, OPTN, F6, the arrow to scroll onto the next menu, F3, which says prob, F4, which says rand, all in capital letters, and then press F2, which says INT. Your screen will then display ran int hashtag and an open bracket. You then need to enter the range across which you want to generate random numbers. So if you want to generate random numbers between 1 and 200, you enter 1, 200, close your bracket, and you will have random integers between 1 and 200. Keep pressing execute to generate new random numbers. You may find it easier to do it this way than using Excel. At the end of this lesson, you should now have 3 samples that you have generated yourself. We will then be using these for some hypothesis testing in the next lesson.